The bitter winter of Winter Haven, Maine, stills every living thing in sight. The frigid season silences all motion across the small town, capable of freezing the world into utter stillness, yet powerless to numb the sharp, piercing cold settling deep within a human heart. At 70 years old, Arthur Haywood had endured life quietly and uncomplainingly in this century-old snowbound town. The greatest regret of his long, steady life was simple yet devastating. He had poured every penny of his life savings, every asset he had ever owned, and every ounce of his unconditional paternal love solely into his only son, Lane Haywood. For 22 years, Arthur had walked through life utterly alone. His beloved wife, Linda, had passed away from a sudden pulmonary illness decades earlier, leaving him a widowed father to a toddler and a lifetime of unshared grief. He had never remarried, never indulged in personal comfort, never chased his own happiness. He had shouldered every burden alone, father, mother, provider, and constant caregiver. Living in extreme frugality and denying himself every small pleasure in life, he had emptied all his reserves to raise Lane into adulthood, securing his son's home, career, and stable foothold in life. He had always gone out of his way to accommodate his daughter-in-law Megan and generously cater to every trivial demand of her family. For decades, he had stood unwaveringly as a free, uncomplaining safety net for his son's young household. He had never craved extravagant repayment or desperate loyalty. In his frail, quiet old age, all he had ever hoped for was a sliver of companionship, a little warmth, a simple birthday dinner, a faint proof that he was not entirely alone in the world. Yet he had never imagined that the son he had sacrificed everything to raise would repay a lifetime of selfless devotion with a cold, casual lie on his 70th birthday. A lazy excuse of busy work had shattered the last fragile hope lingering in his chest, delivering the most ruthless betrayal he had ever endured. The endless snow swirling over Winter Haven was far more than a natural New England winter scene. It was the cold, solemn prologue to an old man finally waking from a lifetime of blind, foolish kindness. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, the sky still drowned in deep charcoal twilight. A fine layer of fresh snow draped the entire township, soft and undisturbed, blanketing rooftops, lawns, and country roads in flawless white. New England winters were never defined by violent, howling storms. Their cruelty was slow, subtle, and insidious. Cold seeped steadily through wooden wall seams, window caulking, and floorboards, creeping deep into bone and marrow, weaving an inescapable chill that no indoor heat could fully dispel. The sugar maple trees, lining the rolling town roads, had long since shed their crimson autumn foliage. Bare, skeletal branches bowed under thick snowdrifts, stretching endlessly toward the gray horizon. Single-family wooden cottages scattered across the residential blocks, with dark cedar exteriors and steep snow-laden roofs, embodied the timeless, understated charm of the century-old Maine town. Vintage kerosene lanterns hung quietly beside each front door, unlit in the dim dawn light, waiting for nightfall to cast soft golden glows over the snow-covered streets. Arthur Haywood's modest wooden cottage rested on the quiet west side of Winter Haven, far enough from the main road to escape trivial traffic noise, yet close enough to access all town conveniences. At 70, his posture remained straight and dignified, unbowed by the weariness that hunched most men his age. Time had woven pure white through his temples and eyebrows, and carved delicate permanent wrinkles around his eyes, lines etched not by bitterness or anger, but by 22 years of quiet solitude, diligent labor, and unremitting self-sacrifice. A pine fire burned steadily in the living room hearth, its warm orange flames dancing gently and casting flickering light across frost-filigreed window panes. The household thermostat held firm at a consistent 70 degrees Fahrenheit, a routine Arthur had kept unchanging for years. Moderate, restrained, perfectly balanced, just like his disciplined, unassuming way of living his entire life. On the wooden dining table sat a plain white ceramic mug filled with steaming black coffee, thin tendrils of vapor rising and dissipating slowly into the cool indoor air. The tabletop was immaculately tidy, free of clutter. Only 3 items rested upon its polished surface: a well-worn local town almanac, a pair of large-print reading glasses, and a laminated photograph faded softly by time. The captured image showed a young Linda holding an infant Lane in her arms, her smile warm and tender, frozen in a long-lost season of happiness. 22 years had passed since Linda's sudden departure. For 22 consecutive years, Arthur had lived in quiet solitude, working as a local handyman to make ends meet, pinching every penny, denying himself new clothes, home renovations, vacations, and every small joy life could offer, all to ensure his son never knew hardship, never lacked comfort, never struggled in life. Today was his 70th birthday. In small-town New England, turning 70 was revered as a solemn milestone, a testament to a long, steady life well lived. Most elderly residents of Winter Haven marked the day with warm family gatherings, casual dinners with grown children, or relaxed outings with lifelong friends to celebrate the grace of growing old peacefully. Arthur wanted no grand fanfare, no expensive gifts, no elaborate parties. His only wish was humble and simple, to sit across the dinner table from his only child and share one quiet, peaceful meal. He had nurtured this quiet expectation an entire week in advance. It was no fleeting whim, but a longing accumulated from countless lonely evenings spent staring at the hearth flames, wondering if his son still spared him a single thought. Every good thing Lane possessed in his adult life grew directly from Arthur's self-denial. After Linda's passing, Arthur had raised the boy with gentle, meticulous devotion, shielding him from grief and hardship long after childhood faded into adulthood. When Lane dreamed of relocating to the Portland suburbs to build a modern, comfortable life, Arthur drained the majority of his lifelong retirement savings to cover the down payment for his son's spacious suburban home. When Lane grew restless with ordinary hourly work and aspired to launch his own lumber and construction supply business, Arthur did not hesitate for a second. He sold the small lakeside plot of land he had reserved in his youth as his personal retirement nest egg, liquidating his only personal investment to fund Lane's startup costs. In the years that followed, Arthur quietly covered countless miscellaneous expenses, vehicle repairs, children's extracurricular fees, and emergency cash infusions whenever Lane's business or household finances faltered. He never kept strict accounts, never demanded repayment, never uttered a single word of complaint. Megan had been part of the family for years. Spoiled by her own mother and inherently partial to her birth family's interests, she had always been subtly demanding and self-serving. Arthur tolerated every slight, every unfair preference, every ungrateful attitude without resistance. He regularly delivered daily groceries, winter heating firewood, and seasonal clothing replacements to Megan's mother, who resided permanently within Winter Haven's town limits. Local neighbors often whispered privately that Arthur diminished himself, living in excessive humility merely to prop up his son's entitled household. They said he catered far too deferentially to his daughter-in-law and her family, sacrificing his own dignity and comfort for unappreciative people. Arthur always responded to such comments with a faint, calm smile and brushed them off. He had only one family left in the world. To his old-fashioned mind, family kept no ledgers, tallied no favors, and calculated no losses. If his son could live a stable, prosperous life, every sacrifice he made felt worthwhile. The snow continued falling gently outside his windows, fine dry grains tapping softly against the glass in a steady, soothing rhythm. Arthur lifted his coffee mug, his fingertips pressing into the warm ceramic surface, his heart light with quiet hopefulness. He picked up his senior-friendly cell phone with enlarged screen and oversized buttons, designed for aging eyes, and dialed his son's number from pure memory. The ringing tone droned steadily for several seconds before Lane's voice rushed through the receiver, harried and preoccupied, clearly impatient before the conversation had even begun. "Dad, what's up? I'm swamped with work right now. The office is chaotic." Arthur softened his tone intentionally, careful not to sound demanding or needy, giving his busy son every possible excuse to decline. "Lane, this coming Saturday is my 70th birthday. I don't want anything big. I was just hoping we could grab dinner together, either here at the house or somewhere in town. Just the two of us. Are you free?" A 2-second silence fell on the line, followed by the faint clatter of computer keyboards and rustling office papers in the background. Lane's tone sharpened with thinly disguised annoyance. "Saturday's no good, Dad. Client orders are stacked sky-high this week. The whole team's pulling overtime. I can't step away. The business is still new. I can't afford to slack off right now." Arthur's fingers tightened slightly around the phone, his knuckles whitening. The gentle hope in his chest sank quietly, like a stone settling into still winter water. He pressed gently, almost pleadingly. It'd only be a couple hours. Just dinner. I asked a whole week early so you could plan for it. It's impossible, Lane replied flatly, no room for negotiation in his brisk, dismissive tone. Everyone's working weekends right now. I'm the manager. I can't abandon my team. Birthdays happen every year. We can celebrate later when things calm down. There was no warm greeting, no preliminary small talk, no early birthday wish, no quiet apology for his unavailability. Only cold, immediate refusal, lazy excuses, and effortless dismissal of his father's once-in-a-lifetime milestone. A faint, dry tightness settled in Arthur's throat. Even so, he refused to argue or burden his son with his disappointment. He murmured softly, "All right, take care of yourself. Don't overwork." "Yep, gotta go." The line went dead. The monotonous dial tone hummed in his ear, mirroring the sudden emptiness flooding his quiet cottage. Harborview Diner stood at the lakefront intersection, right in the heart of town, adjacent to Winter Haven's quiet harbor. A thin sheet of ice stretched across the winter lake surface, and night breezes swept over the frozen water, carrying a sharp, crisp chill through the streets. The restaurant's vintage red brick exterior and floor-to-ceiling glass windows gave it a timeless, luminous charm. Warm golden interior light spilled outward through the clear panes, glowing soft and inviting against the dark, snow-covered night. Evergreen foliage arrangements lined the entrance, paired with understated winter decor on the glass doors. No gaudy festive embellishments, only restrained, elegant touches that perfectly embody the reserved, low-key temperament of a classic New England township. The moment Arthur pushed open the door, a wave of warm air wrapped around him, thick with the rich aromas of freshly baked bread, melted butter, and grilled roasted meats, instantly severing the cold wind and snow lingering outside. Soft jazz melodies drifted gently through the dining room, blending with quiet murmurs of conversation and the faint, delicate clink of tableware against porcelain. The atmosphere was warm, soothing, and grounded in ordinary, peaceful humanity. Most patrons were middle-aged and elderly locals, married couples sharing quiet dinners, long-time friends catching up in low tones, every table steeped in the steady, comforting warmth of small-town life. A mild-mannered, local young hostess in a crisp, clean uniform stepped forward politely to greet him. "Good evening, sir. May I confirm your seating reservation?" Arthur's voice remained calm and gentle, unrushed despite the quiet weight in his chest. "Single reservation, under Arthur Haywood." The hostess smiled warmly and nodded, guiding him toward a small, neat table in the center of the dining room. The table was immaculately set with refined tableware and a tiny flickering candle. "Right this way, Mr. Haywood, and happy birthday." That simple, sincere blessing from a stranger softened the taut tension that had lingered in Arthur's heart all day. He murmured a quiet, "Thank you," and settled slowly into his seat, draping his heavy wool coat over the back of the chair. His gaze drifted casually across the dining room, pausing at the prime window booths lining the front of the restaurant. Those coveted seats offered unobstructed views of the snow-laden town and the dim, shimmering lakeside night scenery, unquestionably the most popular spots in the entire diner. He picked up the thick, printed paper menu, warm and substantial beneath his fingertips, filled with classic American steakhouse fare. His fingers traced slowly down the item list as he settled on his simple birthday choice: a classic sirloin steak, roasted garlic potatoes, and a mug of spiced mulled wine. A modest, quiet celebration for his 70th year of life. He had just lifted his gaze to signal the server when his eyes swept inadvertently across the front row window booths, and his movement froze completely. His breath caught in his throat, every muscle in his body locking into stillness. Seated in the most spacious, premium 6-person window booth, the very best seat in the entire restaurant with unrivaled lake and snow views, was Lane. The son who had insisted all day that he was swamped with work and completely unavailable sat relaxed and at ease, a lazy smile on his face as he chatted and laughed with the people around him. To his left sat Megan, her makeup polished and immaculate, dressed in a brand-new cashmere sweater, her features bright and composed as she elegantly sliced through the steak on her plate. Beside her sat her mother, her younger brother, and her younger sister, filling the booth completely. The entire maternal family was gathered in full, boisterous celebration, their table buzzing with warmth and light-hearted joy. The table was abundantly laden with extravagant dishes: baked lobster tails, pan-seared salmon, thick-cut premium steak, creamy mushroom soup, an assorted artisanal dessert platter, and a chilled bottle of sparkling red wine. The crisp clink of crystal glasses, continuous easy laughter, and faint playful chatter filled the warm air, creating a scene of bustling familial delight that stung Arthur's eyes with its brightness. Every last trace of lingering warmth and fragile hope in Arthur's chest froze solid in an instant, doused completely by frigid, unforgiving reality. It was Saturday evening. Lane had no overtime work. His so-called busy schedule had been nothing but a shallow, calculated lie fabricated to avoid keeping his father company on his 70th birthday. He had not lacked time for his father. He had simply refused to allocate any of his time, tenderness, or companionship to the aging man who had single-handedly raised him. He had cleared his entire evening without hesitation, dressed thoughtfully, and splurged on an elaborate feast solely to entertain and indulge his wife's family. He had reserved the finest booth, ordered the most luxurious dishes, and offered his warmest smiles and most attentive patience entirely to his in-laws. Meanwhile, his biological father, the man who had spent a lifetime sacrificing every comfort, every asset, every personal joy to build Lane's stable, prosperous life, had been casually brushed off and left alone, forgotten, and abandoned on his 70th birthday. Arthur remained perfectly upright in his chair, his posture dignified and steady. No fury contorted his features, no humiliation flared in his expression, no public breakdown disrupted the restaurant's peaceful atmosphere. Decades of quiet restraint and gentle forbearance had ingrained unshakable dignity into his character. He would not create a scene, would not storm across the dining room to confront his son, would not strip away Lane's polite facade in front of strangers. He simply sat quietly, his gaze fixed steadily on the bustling booth a few meters away, silently observing the vibrant celebration that existed entirely because of his lifelong sacrifices, a celebration from which he was ruthlessly excluded. He watched every detail with piercing clarity. Lane wore a constant, easy smile, carefully cutting portions of steak for his mother-in-law and pouring sparkling wine into her glass with meticulous deference. He joked freely with Megan's younger brother, engaging in light-hearted banter with endless patience and warm attentiveness. This thoughtful, considerate, devoted version of Lane was one Arthur had rarely, if ever, witnessed in their decades of father-son life. From childhood to adulthood, every comfort Lane had ever known, every academic opportunity, every career breakthrough, every stable milestone in his life had been underwritten entirely by Arthur's self-denial. After Linda's premature death, Arthur had embodied both strict father and nurturing mother, guarding Lane's growth with meticulous care. When Lane's startup faced capital shortages and operational crises, Arthur had liquidated his private property to fund his son's dreams without hesitation. When Lane's household finances tightened, Arthur had quietly subsidized every gap. Even the daily necessities and winter provisions for Megan and her mother had always been generously and uncomplainingly provided by him. Arthur had lived in relentless frugality his entire adult life. He wore the same clothes for over a decade, refusing to replace worn garments. He kept aged, outdated furniture in his cottage, never splurging on renovations or upgrades. He rationed heating firewood carefully through brutal Maine winters, counting every resource to save every possible dollar. He had poured every finest thing life had to offer into Lane's hands, bestowing all his wealth, resources, and unconditional affection solely upon his son. He had always believed blood ran thicker than borrowed family bonds, that sincere lifelong devotion would eventually yield gratitude and companionship in his old age. He had clung to the quiet hope that his endless tolerance and selfless compromise would grant him a peaceful, accompanied twilight. Yet the scene unfolding directly before his eyes was brutally, undeniably clear. Half a lifetime of selfless sacrifice had been nothing but one-sided delusion, empty self-gratification. In Lane's heart, his wife's family's happiness and comfort would always take precedence over his biological father's needs. Arthur's birthday, Arthur's quiet hopes, Arthur's lonely twilight years were trivial, insignificant, and infinitely expendable. Lane could dismiss his father's deepest wishes with effortless dishonesty without a single twinge of guilt. The server approached gently, setting a glass of warm water on the table and waiting quietly to take his order. Arthur nodded faintly, his voice steady, flat, and completely devoid of emotional fluctuation, betraying none of the catastrophic heartbreak unfolding within him. "I'll have the usual. Sirloin steak, roasted potatoes, and a mug of mulled wine, please." He did not request a seat change. He did not turn away or hide from the sight. He remained exactly where he was, seated calm and composed across the dining room, slowly eating his solitary birthday dinner while peacefully witnessing the false familial joy unfolding at the neighboring booth. The food remained warm, the flavors refined and pleasant, yet every bite tasted hollow and cold on his tongue. No amount of fine cuisine could thaw the icy desolation settling permanently in his chest. He ate slowly and methodically, maintaining his lifelong elegant restraint. Even with his heart shattered irreparably inside, he refused to reveal weakness or lose composure in public. The lavish family feast lasted a full 2 hours. Throughout those entire 2 hours, Lane never once glanced across the dining room. He never spared a single thought for his father sitting alone in the crowd on his 70th birthday. He drowned himself entirely in the carefree, indulgent company of his in-laws, completely untroubled by the father he had callously abandoned. As the night deepened, the celebration finally drew to a close. Lane stood and settled the substantial bill without the slightest hesitation or complaint. Megan linked her arm proudly through his, her face glowing with satisfaction after the enjoyable evening. Megan's mother carried an elaborate dessert box Lane had thoughtfully packed for her. The whole family clustered together, chatting cheerfully as they walked toward the exit, stepping out into the snowy night. Not a single person glanced back. Not one soul spared a thought for the solitary, elderly man sitting in the dim corner, quietly finishing his 70th birthday dinner. To the joyful group, Arthur Haywood, the man who had funded their entire comfortable lifestyle, who had sacrificed his life to build Lane's success, who had quietly supported their family for years, was nothing more than a nameless stranger in the background. Arthur watched their departing figures, steadily, tracking their light, carefree footsteps through the snow until they vanished completely beyond the street lamp glow and swirling night snow. Only then did he slowly lift his gaze. The table candle flickered softly, its warm golden light gilding his frost-white hair and weathered features, yet it could not touch the frozen cold entrenched in his heart. Those 2 hours of silent observation had wounded him far more deeply than any screaming argument or bitter confrontation ever could. This quiet, unspoken betrayal cut deeper than any deliberate cruelty. In that moment, Arthur saw the unvarnished, irreversible truth with absolute clarity. It was never that Lane was too busy. It was never unavoidable circumstance or life pressure. The simple, brutal truth was that in Lane's life priorities, his aging, dependent father with no remaining practical value ranked eternally last, so far down that he did not even deserve a place on the list. Decades of unreserved financial support, years of endless tolerance and selfless compromise had yielded no gratitude, no filial piety, no loyalty. They had only bred entitled expectation, casual dismissal, and blatant, unapologetic favoritism. At that exact moment, the invisible emotional cord of paternal forbearance and self-sacrifice that had sustained Arthur for more than 20 years snapped completely. It broke silently, cleanly, and irrevocably. There was no violent outburst, no dramatic collapse, only profound, absolute, unshakable clarity settling over his entire being. Arthur finished the last bite of his steak and drained the final sip of warm mulled wine with unhurried composure. Though his inner world had been completely upended, he preserved the quiet dignity ingrained in his character through 70 years of steady living, moving slowly, calmly, and impeccably restrained. He settled his bill, rose from his seat, and stepped out of the restaurant. The night wind swept fine snowflakes against his face, frigid winter air enveloping his entire body in an instant. Yet for the first time in decades, Arthur felt utterly unfazed by New England's bitter cold. The freezing winter snow was trivial and mild compared to the bone-chilling cruelty of human ingratitude. He had walked into town that evening soft-hearted and hopeful, carrying gentle expectations for his only son. He walked home empty-hearted and sober, every illusion shattered, every misplaced devotion dissolved away. The night was dark and quiet, the township streets nearly deserted. Streetlights stood silent and solitary, stretching his shadow long and thin across the snow. The crisp crunch of snow beneath his boots echoed steadily through the empty roads, the only sound in the stillness, a quiet testament to his lonely, unwavering resolve. When he returned to his lonely cottage, the hearth fire had long burned down to cold ash, its residual warmth fading completely, leaving a faint chill lingering in the quiet living room. Arthur did not immediately turn on the lights. He sat alone in the dim pale glow filtering through the windows from snow-reflected moonlight, remaining motionless in the silent darkness for a very long time. He did not roar in anger. He did not weep from grievance. He did not impulsively call Lane to demand an explanation. 70 years of life had stripped away youthful recklessness and impetuous emotion. Every ounce of pain, disappointment, and sorrow settled into profound, rational calm and irreversible clarity. A lifetime of gentle devotion, unconditional backing, and endless tolerance had rewarded him only with his son's cold detachment, his daughter-in-law's entitled assumption, and his in-law family's greedy exploitation. He finally understood fully. Sincere affection could not inspire reciprocal warmth, and selfless favor could never cultivate gratitude or filial duty. From this night forward, he would withdraw every ounce of his past devotion. He would guard his remaining dignity and secure the peaceful, stable old age he had long sacrificed for others. Late into the night, Arthur finally switched on his desk lamp. Warm golden light spilled over the neat stacks of documents spread across his wooden desktop. He slipped on his reading glasses and opened a thick file folder tucked deep inside his desk drawer, a folder holding every record of his lifelong investment in Lane's life. Inside were meticulously organized bank transfer receipts, annual account statements, property down payment vouchers, asset gift agreements, and business startup funding transaction confirmations. Every financial subsidy, every emergency bailout, every generous favor was carefully documented and preserved. He had kept these records not out of greed or a desire for future repayment, but purely from a lifelong habit of rigorous carefulness. Once, he had treasured family bonds too deeply to ever tally costs. Now, he saw clearly, these records were his only tool to stop further loss and protect himself. He sorted, categorized, and reviewed every page with slow, precise thoroughness. 5 years prior, $120,000 for Lane's Portland suburban home down payment, entirely withdrawn from Arthur's personal retirement savings. 4 years prior, $80,000 in startup capital for Lane's supply company, raised entirely through the sale of Arthur's ancestral lakeside property, his only personal retirement asset. Over the past 3 years, irregular monthly living subsidies, emergency operational funds, vehicle maintenance coverage, and children's academic supplements accumulated to well over $70,000 in uncompensated support. Beyond these formal records were countless undocumented expenditures, years of daily provisions, house repairs, winter heating supplies, and routine favors freely provided for Megan's mother and her family, too numerous to quantify. Every entry was clear, precise, and unarguable, each line a quiet, painful testament to his wasted devotion. Staring at the irrefutable black and white documentation, Arthur finally admitted the unvarnished truth to himself. Most of his life's hard work, frugality, and sacrifice had amounted to nothing but self-centered delusion. He had sacrificed his life's savings and secure old age to raise a cold, ungrateful son and nurture a family of greedy, entitled takers who assumed his generosity was endless and unconditional. By the time he finished sorting every document, the sky outside had pale gray with pre-dawn light. The snowfall had ceased entirely, and a frigid, quiet dawn broke over Winter Haven. Though he had not slept a single wink all night, Arthur's eyes held no trace of exhaustion. Instead, they shone with a firm, unyielding resolve he had never possessed in his decades of quiet forbearance. He picked up his phone and opened the long-saved contact of Eric Cole, Winter Haven's most senior and respected civil attorney. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, the town still quiet and half asleep, the new day barely stirring over the snow-covered rooftops. Arthur dialed the number without hesitation. When Eric answered, his tone was calm, restrained, crisp, and utterly final, devoid of all emotional fluctuation, holding only unshakable resolution. Attorney Cole, this is Arthur Haywood. I need to formally initiate legal proceedings. I intend to revoke all unconditional financial gifts granted to my son Lane Haywood, recover every substantial sum I have invested in his support, and permanently terminate all trust inheritance provisions established in his name. The moment he ended the call, the first ray of morning sunlight broke through the thick cloud cover, spilling bright, clear illumination across the snow-blanketed town, sweeping away weeks of gray winter gloom. The lifelong obsession of paternal sacrifice was finally, completely laid to rest. The decades of one-sided, compromising familial devotion had reached its definitive end. The winter morning broke clean and crisp over Winter Haven. Snow-capped rooftops, empty roads, and quiet woodlands glowed pure white under the rising sun, sweeping away the gloom and cold of the night before and gracing the town with a quiet, solemn clarity. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Arthur tidied his few belongings. Dressed in a neat, dark winter coat and clutching the fully compiled stack of evidentiary documents, he drove steadily toward Cole Law Firm in the heart of town. The firm occupied a vintage two-story building on Main Street, its rustic wooden exterior framed by clean white window trim. Understated and unassuming, it was the town's longest-standing civil practice, specializing in property notarization and domestic dispute resolution. Decades of reliable service had earned it solid credibility and the complete trust of Winter Haven's residents. The front entrance was spotless and quiet, free of bustling crowds. Stepping inside, one was greeted by a calm, professional atmosphere. Polished wooden floors shimmered softly beneath warm overhead lighting, while wall displays bore official practice licenses and local community honors, embodying years of steady, reputable service. Eric Cole was already waiting in his private office. A lifelong New England native, middle-aged, measured, and methodical, Eric possessed intimate expertise in Maine's civil statutes, particularly family property disputes and gift revocation cases. He had known Arthur for many years and well understood the old man's gentle, generous nature. Arthur had lived a quiet, honest life, rarely quarreling with anyone and never once involving himself in legal conflict. When Arthur stepped into the office, his expression calm yet unshakably resolute, Eric looked faintly surprised and offered a quiet greeting. "Good morning, Arthur. You reached out urgently first thing today. Is there a serious matter you need resolved?" Arthur skipped all unnecessary pleasantries. He set the thick, neatly organized folder gently on the desk, brushed a finger lightly over its cover, and spoke in a soft yet unwavering tone. "Eric, I intend to reclaim every substantial asset I gifted to my son Lane. I want all unconditional financial support revoked and every inheritance provision reserved for him permanently terminated." Eric blinked in quiet astonishment and reached for the folder. Page after page of bank records, property down payment vouchers, asset liquidation receipts, and gift annotations lay perfectly organized, forming an unbroken, chronological timeline of financial support. Every transaction corresponded precisely to Lane's home purchase, business startup costs, and daily household expenses. The more he read, the graver his expression grew. In decades of practice, Eric had witnessed countless parent-child property disputes, most fraught with hysterical arguments, bitter confrontations, and shattered family harmony. Yet Arthur remained eerily composed throughout. No anger, no grievance, no complaint. He carried himself with the quiet detachment of someone settling a routine, impersonal matter. "Arthur, these cumulative sums are extraordinarily large," Eric said firmly, setting the files down and meeting his gaze directly. "I must confirm this is not a momentary emotional decision. Once legal proceedings commence, all gifts will be revoked, funds recovered, and the trust nullified. Every record will be permanently documented. Your financial relationship with Lane will be completely severed. No further support, no safety net, no second chances." Arthur sat straight in his chair, his gaze clear and unwavering, without the slightest hesitation. "This is no impulse. On my 70th birthday, I finally saw the truth clearly." He spoke slowly and deliberately, stating facts without accusation or resentment, simply laying out a lifetime of sacrifice and quiet disillusionment. "My wife passed away 22 years ago. I raised Lane entirely alone. I have lived frugally my entire adult life, denying myself new clothes, home repairs, every small comfort life offers. Every dollar I saved, every asset I owned, I poured entirely into building his future. I bought his home, funded his business, subsidized his household, and supported his wife's family without hesitation or expectation of return. All I ever hoped for in my old age was simple peace and a little familial companionship. Yet on my 70th birthday, he lied about working overtime to avoid me. He abandoned his aging father entirely to feast and celebrate with his wife's family. I indulged him for decades, compromised my entire life for his comfort. In return, I received only entitled expectation and cold, unapologetic indifference. I am old now, with little time left. I refuse to spend my remaining years as his endless safety net, funding the lives of ungrateful people who disregard every sacrifice I've made. I want every gifted sum and asset fully recovered. The trust that named him sole heir is to be voided entirely. Moving forward, I will rewrite my last will and testament to reserve all property, savings, and assets solely for my own retirement and final expenses. I will no longer bear any financial responsibility whatsoever for Lane's household. His words held no explosive emotion, no desperate outburst, yet every syllable carried quiet, unbreakable resolve, the accumulated weight of a lifetime of forbearance and the final, irreversible release of misplaced paternal devotion. Having heard the full story, Eric understood completely. A quiet sense of respect settled over him. He had seen countless families where aging parents continued spoiling ungrateful children, clinging to broken bonds out of soft-heartedness even after years of neglect and betrayal. It was exceedingly rare to meet someone like Arthur, a man gentle and accommodating his whole life, yet capable of calm, decisive self-preservation the moment his kindness was irreparably abused. "I understand your demands fully," Eric nodded solemnly, his tone professional and assured. Under Maine civil law, gifts granted out of moral familial obligation may be legally revoked if the recipient fails to uphold basic duties of care and companionship and willfully disregards the donor's well-being. Your documentation is comprehensive, your timeline flawless, and your evidence ironclad. Your case is guaranteed to succeed. Eric moved efficiently through every required procedure, drafting the official gift revocation legal notice, compiling litigation materials, freezing the existing trust assets, initiating the formal fund recovery process, and filing for the nullification of the original will provisions. Every step adhered strictly to state legal protocol, thorough, precise, and fully compliant. Throughout the entire process, Arthur remained calm and patient, cooperating steadily with every signature, confirmation, and document review. Not once did his resolve waver. By 11 o'clock in the morning, every legal procedure was fully finalized and officially enacted. Eric organized all official receipts and procedural documents and handed them to Arthur. Everything is now in effect. All financial support is terminated, the trust is voided, and asset recovery proceedings are officially underway. I will personally serve the legal notice to Lane, handling all formalities on your behalf. You will not need to confront him directly. Your dignity will remain fully protected. Arthur accepted the documents, folded them neatly away, and rose with a quiet nod. "Thank you for your trouble, Eric." Stepping outside the firm, Arthur felt the warm, pure winter sunlight settle lightly on his shoulders. Street snow melted gently under the sun, leaving the roads clean and the town wrapped in serene, undisturbed tranquility. He drove home at a steady pace, his heart lighter and clearer than it had been in decades. At last, he had broken free from the lifelong shackles of unappreciated familial obligation. The endless cycle of one-sided sacrifice was permanently over. Back in his quiet, empty cottage, Arthur rekindled the pine fire in his hearth, filling the rooms with gentle, welcoming warmth. He carefully stored all legal documents away in the depths of his desk drawer, then brewed a cup of warm coffee and settled into the wooden chair by the window, watching the quiet snow-covered scenery outside. In this moment, there were no desperate hopes, no hidden grievances, no more compromises. Only pure, uncomplicated peace and stability. At 70 years old, Arthur Haywood was finally living for himself. Meanwhile, Lane remained oblivious to the irreversible shift that had just taken place. Still basking in the cheerful, carefree warmth of the previous night's family celebration. He had no idea his father's heart had fully hardened, his illusions completely shattered. He continued taking for granted that his father would always be his unwavering, unconditional safety net, that no matter how coldly or dismissively he behaved, the old man would always wait faithfully and forgive endlessly. He had never once imagined that the mild, tolerant father who had yielded to him his entire life would, once resolute, never turn back. The bold formal text was stark, cold, and unflinchingly clear, each line striking him like a sharp blow. Lane read every word slowly, his expression darkening step by step, first stunned disbelief, then a swirling mix of panic and bitter resentment. He snatched his cell phone up immediately and dialed Arthur's number 3 times in quick succession. Each call rang through successfully, yet no one picked up on the other end. It hit him then, slow and unignorable. His father, the soft, compliant man who had always bent over backward to accommodate every one of his whims, was genuinely furious, his heart frozen over for good. Panic surged through Lane's chest, and he could no longer sit still. He abandoned all pending work, raced to his car, and sped toward Arthur's old cottage on the outskirts of Winter Haven. His tires crunched fast over slushy, half-melted snow lining the roads. His mind buzzed with irritation and confusion, yet not a flicker of remorse or self-reflection crossed his thoughts. In Lane's mind, his father had always been a soft-hearted pushover who spoiled and indulged him without limit. Missing one birthday dinner was such a trivial matter, there was no justification for dragging lawyers into it, demanding repayment of every asset, and wiping him entirely from the will. He thought Arthur was overreacting, unreasonably rigid, and unfeeling. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Lane rushed up to the cottage door and pushed his way inside without knocking. The hearth blazed warm and bright, the room tidy and spotless. Arthur sat by the window absorbed in a book, calm and unhurried. Sunlight spilled over his snow-white hair, lending him a gentle, relaxed air, with no hint of distress or anger visible on his face. Seeing his father's unruffled composure only stoked Lane's anxiety further. His tone sharpened with undisguised resentment and accusation the moment he opened his mouth, launching straight into interrogation. "Dad, what on earth are you doing? Why hire a lawyer to send these papers, demand every cent back, and cut me out of your inheritance? All because I skipped dinner with you on Saturday night?" He spoke rapidly, confrontational and aggressive, offering no greeting, no apology, no shred of guilt. From the second he stepped through the door, he shifted all blame onto Arthur's supposed stubbornness. Arthur slowly closed his book and set it down on the side table, lifting his gaze to meet his son's eyes. His stare was mild and quiet, free of rage or reproach, carrying only a quiet detachment that came from seeing a person's true nature laid bare, like observing a familiar stranger rather than his own flesh and blood. "That's exactly it," Arthur replied plainly, his voice flat and unchanging. "It all comes down to that birthday evening." Lane's temper flared instantly, his tone thick with self-pity and desperate excuses. "I was swamped with work that day. Orders were pouring in, the whole team was pulling overtime, I couldn't slip away. It's just one dinner, birthdays roll around every single year. I could have made it up to you later. Do you really have to blow this out of proportion, drag us to court, cut off all my support and humiliate me like this?" "You were not busy." Arthur shook his head faintly, his voice steady and cool, each word sharp enough to pierce every lie Lane had told. "You couldn't spare time for me, yet you had plenty of time to feast with your mother-in-law's whole family, eating lobster and sipping wine while you laughed the night away." Lane's face blanched instantly, his pupils narrowing as all excuses died unspoken in his throat. He had never imagined his private dinner with his wife's relatives had been witnessed by his father, every lazy lie and evasive pretense laid bare completely. After a split second of flustered shock, he still refused to examine his own wrongdoing. Instead, he softened his tone into fake, pleading desperation, relying on the hollow, warm rhetoric that had always worked to sway Arthur in the past. "Dad, it was just an impromptu family get-together. Megan's mom rarely comes into town. I couldn't turn her down. I did think about you, honest. I never meant to stand you up on your birthday. Please call off the legal action and drop all these claims, okay? If they seize back that money and the house down payment, my company will collapse, I won't be able to cover the mortgage, and our whole family's life will fall apart completely. His pleas came fast and frantic, yet every single concern revolved around his own losses and collapsing lifestyle. Never once did he pause to ask how lonely Arthur had felt sitting alone on his 70th birthday. Never once did he express guilt over decades of cold, dismissive treatment. Arthur watched his son's transparent performance, the polished expensive clothes, the frantic, self-centered panic, and the last faint thread of paternal affection lingering in his heart dissolved entirely. He spoke slowly, each word firm and unshakable, laying out decades of quiet sacrifice and hard-won clarity all at once. "Lane, I will say this plainly one time, and this will be the last time I reason with you. I am 70 years old, with little time left to live. I owe you nothing at all. 22 years ago, your mother passed away, and I bore every burden alone. I never remarried, never allowed myself any joy or leisure, scrimping and saving every penny to raise you into adulthood. When you wanted to buy a house, I drained my life savings to cover the down payment. When you wanted to launch a business, I sold land passed down through our family to fund your startup. When money grew tight in your household after marriage, I sent regular silent subsidies and bent over backward to accommodate your wife's entire family without complaint. I've lived a life of strict frugality for myself, yet given you endless generosity without reservation. I never expected you to strike it rich and repay me. All I asked for was basic respect, a small amount of regular companionship. I invited you a full week in advance, just for one simple father-son dinner, and you couldn't even grant me that tiny, humble wish. You chose to lie about overtime work, so you could celebrate and enjoy yourself with your wife's relatives, leaving me all alone in this empty cottage to wallow in loneliness. In your hierarchy of priorities, the fun of outsiders, your wife's fleeting happiness, and your mother-in-law's approval have always mattered far more than my hopes and feelings. You grew used to taking my sacrifices for granted, leaning on me as your permanent safety net, yet you never once offered me a scrap of warmth or your time in return. I used to be soft-hearted, believing blood ties would breed harmony if I only kept compromising and tolerating you. I see the truth now. Kindness does not automatically earn kindness. One-sided, endless giving only breeds entitled indifference. The legal letters will not be withdrawn. Every dollar I gifted will be recovered, and the inheritance trust is permanently voided. Starting today, I will no longer cover your mortgage payments, subsidize your business expenses, support your household, or make concessions for your family. You are a grown, established man fully capable of standing on your own 2 feet. From this day forward, you bear all your own hardships and take full responsibility for your own life. There was no shouting, no screaming, no vicious accusations in his words, yet every line rang clear and unassailable, drawing a permanent hard line across decades of blurred, forgiving familial boundaries. Lane's fake pleading faded away entirely, replaced by sharp anxiety and bitter resentment. He snapped back, stung and furious. "You're being cruel and heartless. Over something this trivial, you're cutting off every lifeline I have? Do I even count as your son to you? For 70 years, you were the only person that mattered to me." Arthur glanced back at him calmly, no trace of fondness left in his eyes. "But from this moment onward, I only look out for myself. You get to enjoy lively dinners with your in-laws, brush off my loneliness, and dismiss my heartfelt wishes, so you must accept the consequences of losing all my support. Family love is a two-way choice to care for one another, not an endless one-sided safety net for me to sacrifice everything for you." Staring at his father's unbreakable resolve and the cold, distant look in his eyes, Lane finally grasped the truth. Arthur's heart had truly hardened beyond repair, and he would never indulge his selfishness unconditionally ever again. He had no more excuses left to offer, his chest heavy with tangled panic, resentment, and powerlessness. His face turned dark with frustration as he spun around and stormed out. The front door clicked shut softly behind him, severing all the gentle accommodation and warmth that had once defined their bond. Silence settled back over the cottage, the fire in the hearth still burning warm and steady. Arthur sat quietly by the window, peaceful and untroubled, free of regret or longing, filled only with the quiet relief of being fully freed at last. He understood now what true dignity meant. It was not endless compromise and sacrificing your own peace for others, but knowing when to cut your losses and protect the remaining years of your own life. The day Arthur's financial support vanished arrived swift and brutal, with zero room for gradual adjustment. Before this falling out, Lane and Megan's entire household existed solely on Arthur's uncompensated generosity. The spacious Portland home carried a down payment drawn straight from Arthur's retirement savings. The lumber business survived month to month only on the cash infusions Arthur quietly supplied. Most of their crippling monthly mortgage burden had been offset by hidden regular subsidies from the old man. Even their comfortable, upscale daily lifestyle and every expense for Megan's mother rested entirely on Arthur's silent financial backing. The couple had grown thoroughly accustomed to effortless, worry-free living. They took Arthur's sacrifices as an unchanging given, never pausing to grasp the weight of hard labor or financial strain. They freely spent the elderly man's life savings to sustain a standard of living far beyond what their own incomes could support, yet they never offered him a single word of gratitude or sincere care. The moment Arthur cut off all aid, froze every stream of support, and filed paperwork to recover every gifted sum, their fragile, manufactured stability crumbled to dust in an instant. The mortgage hit them first. Without Arthur's hidden subsidies softening the blow, the full weight of the steep monthly loan payment crashed entirely onto Lane's shoulders, draining their household cash flow and leaving them trapped under unrelenting financial pressure. Shortly after, the lumber supply company's cash chain snapped completely. Lane's business had always stood on shaky ground, sustained year after year by Arthur's emergency capital injections. Stripped of that safety net, the business accounts emptied rapidly. He could no longer cover upfront costs for orders, settle outstanding supplier invoices, or meet payroll for his staff. Operations ground to a complete halt. Within half a month, Lane's life devolved into unending chaos and desperate hardship. Megan, who had long enjoyed a cushioned, stress-free existence, was the first to unravel emotionally. She had relied on Arthur's handouts to spoil her mother and feed her own vanity, never once enduring genuine financial hardship. Now confronted with plummeting living standards, overdue mortgage notices, a failing business, and constant cash shortages, her inherently selfish, sharp-tongued nature laid bare for all to see. Nonstop arguments erupted in their home. There were no physical fights, only frigid, endless rounds of blame and complaint that dragged on every single day. "This is all your fault. Why couldn't you just go have dinner with your father that night? Now he's turned against us, cut every bit of support, the house and business are falling apart, and we can barely scrape by. How was I supposed to know he'd be this petty and hold a grudge? It was just one meal. He's advanced in years and still can't find it in himself to be forgiving." Lane seethed with resentment, refusing to acknowledge his own fault and shifting all blame to his father, consumed by unfair grievance. The two traded accusations back and forth. The warm, harmonious home they had once shared filled with nothing but anxiety, bitterness, and conflict, shrouded in a perpetually cold, oppressive atmosphere. The most stark, ironic shift came from Megan's mother. For years, Arthur had freely provided her with groceries, home repairs, and regular cash assistance. She had showered him with hollow praise and put on an affectionate facade whenever she benefited from his generosity. But once Arthur's support dried up, and Lane and Megan could no longer afford to fund her wants, her attitude flipped 180 degrees overnight. She stopped dropping by for warm small talk and stopped complimenting her son-in-law's success. Instead, she visited daily to gripe and criticize, sneering at Lane's failed business and lack of wealth, complaining that her daughter suffered a miserable life married to him. She endlessly chided the pair for foolishly alienating their sole reliable benefactor, holding them solely responsible for every hardship their family endured. The cheerful family dinners of years past vanished entirely, replaced by unceasing scolding, resentment, and disdain. Witnessing her mother's cold opportunism, her husband's helpless anxiety, and the total mess their life had become, Megan's spirit shattered completely. Marital friction intensified drastically, widening an irreparable rift between husband and wife. Within a matter of weeks, Lane experienced firsthand what it meant to be abandoned by everyone he'd prioritized. It finally dawned on him. Over all these years, the only person who had loved him unconditionally, given freely without expectation, and quietly caught him every time he stumbled was his aging father, the man he had consistently ignored, lied to, and cast aside. The warmth from his in-laws, The harmony of family gatherings, the comfortable lifestyle he'd taken for granted, none of it stemmed from his own talent or hard work. All of it was an illusion built entirely on Arthur's selfless sacrifices and constant financial backing. With Arthur's safety net pulled away, every ounce of fake warmth, superficial prestige, and easy prosperity collapsed without a trace. Though guilt and regret gnawed at him constantly, Lane could not bring himself to show up at the cottage and beg for reconciliation. Occasionally, he would drive through Winter Haven, glancing from a distance at the familiar wooden house, yet he never dared draw near. He knew full well he had crushed his father's last remaining hope and drained decades of paternal love through his own selfishness. Every hardship he faced now was a consequence he alone had created, and he had no one else to blame. While Lane's household drowned in endless anxiety, bickering and crippling financial strain, Arthur's later years bloomed into a brand-new, peaceful existence. Having reclaimed all his assets and secured every dollar of his retirement savings in his cottage, Arthur broke free from decades of ceaseless sacrifice and obligation. He no longer needed to run himself ragged, tending to his son's family, bend over backward to accommodate his daughter-in-law and her mother, or sacrifice his own comfort to prop up other people's lives. At 70 years old, his life finally belonged solely to himself. Winter still wrapped Winter Haven in wind and snow, yet Arthur's outlook had transformed entirely. Once, snowfall had meant lonely, empty evenings with no one to keep him company. Now, the winter landscape brought quiet peace and gentle tranquility. He no longer lingered indoors, waiting in vain for rare calls or fleeting visits from his son. Instead, he stepped out regularly to embrace a life centered on his own joy. The town's senior community center became his regular haunt. It was filled with fellow retirees who carried easy, open hearts and steady daily routines, free from the chaos of children's troubles and self-serving power struggles. Their friendships were simple, sincere, and unburdened by hidden agendas. Drawing on his decades of experience as a handyman, Arthur often repaired small trinkets and restored worn furniture for the other elderly residents. His gentle, genuine demeanor let him fit seamlessly into the senior group. Each morning, he tramped through snow with his friends for walks. In the afternoons, they gathered around fireplaces to chat. On weekends, they fished together and sipped tea, and in spare hours, he read and practiced calligraphy. His days felt full, stable, and wonderfully unrushed. For the first time, Arthur allowed himself to spend money freely, abandoning the lifelong frugality that had forced him to deny every small comfort. He replaced the cottage's worn-out furniture, bought efficient, cozy heating appliances, and stocked fresh, quality groceries, taking care to prepare satisfying meals for himself after a lifetime of putting everyone else first. On bright winter afternoons, he drove short trips to tiny surrounding Maine towns. He admired snow-covered lakefronts, bare winter woodlands, and pale, wide winter skies, exploring quiet New England scenery he had never once had time to appreciate while devoting every resource to Lane and his family. His well-being was plain for all to see. The permanent weariness and loneliness that had shadowed his features faded completely. Light returned to his eyes, his posture grew taller and more relaxed, and his calm, easy bearing made him look years younger. Every neighbor and friend remarked that Mr. Haywood had finally seen the truth of life and learned to live solely for himself. A bitterly ironic scene played out time and again on the town's snow-lined streets. Arthur, dressed in plain casual layers, wandered the snow on foot, relaxed and unhurried, his expression soft and untroubled. Not far away stood Lane, haggard, worn out, bloodshot-eyed, worn thin by endless work and relentless household fights. Every accidental meeting left Lane frozen in place, a heavy flood of guilt and sorrow washing over him. He watched his father's carefree, untroubled state, then contrasted it with his own messy, crumbling life, consumed by unending regret and bitter resentment. Countless times, he yearned to step forward, apologize, beg for reconciliation, and win back his father's support and affection. Yet each time, Arthur's calm, distant gaze stopped him cold. Arthur remained mild and polite. He would offer a quiet nod when they crossed paths, maintaining basic civility and dignity, but the warm, unreserved fondness and constant concern he'd once held for his son were gone forever. That one-of-a-kind, boundless paternal love, That decades-long willingness to sacrifice everything for Lane's sake had frozen solid and vanished entirely on that snow-covered 70th birthday night, never to return. Lane finally understood the hard truth. A parent's generosity is never an entitlement, and familial love requires mutual care to survive. Boundless indulgence cannot breed gratitude. Endless compromise only breeds cold, self-centered selfishness. Yet the cruelest regret in life is waking up to your mistakes when everything has already changed, leaving no path back to how things once were. Megan remained full of constant resentment, complaining endlessly about their impoverished circumstances and shifting blame to others without pause. Her mother dropped all false warmth, treating them only with unmasked disdain and coldness. The couple's domestic conflicts dragged on day after day with no resolution, and Lane bore every hardship alone, with no one to lean on. This was the quiet, unglamorous price of taking family love for granted and wounding the person who loved you most. There were no dramatic, extreme punishments, only a lifetime of lingering regret and unshakable guilt that could never be erased. The last heavy snowstorm of deep winter slowly drew to an end. Morning sunlight broke through cloud cover, spilling golden light across every corner of Winter Haven. The blanket of snow glowed bright and pure, washing away all the bitter cold of past months. Arthur stood on the front steps of his cottage, facing the warm sunrise and gazing out over the luminous snow, his heart quiet, clear, and at peace. For half a century, he had labored tirelessly for his son and his family, giving away every resource he owned out of blind, gentle kindness. Now he had woken up, cut his losses, withdrawn his misplaced devotion, and set out to enjoy his remaining years in peace. He had learned that a fulfilling old age never hinges on relying on children or clinging to hopes of filial care. True peace comes from holding fast to your own self-respect and security, living free of burdens and walking through life with quiet ease. Family love can never be a one-sided sacrifice, nor is selfless giving something owed to anyone. If you brush off another's sincere affection, you will inevitably lose their devotion. If you betray the person who loves you most, you must bear the bitter consequences alone. The winter snow melted away, and spring drew near. At 70, Arthur left behind a lifetime of heartache and stepped into a gentle, unburdened old age that belonged only to him.